Well, Greg, welcome to a top secret venue in the middle of London, overlooking the Thames here. We're here for the Global Air and Space Chiefs Conference. I always try and stumble over that. Really big moment in the diary for air power and space power. As an overview, what are we expecting for the next couple of days?
Yeah, well, a really rich dialogue on all the topics that you'd expect for air and space. But 60 visiting chiefs, I think, is the current calculation. So, a big audience, all the right people here, and beautiful weather. Hopefully the air conditioning lasts.
I always wonder, because some of this stuff's all at a level of secrecy or whatever. Clearly you can't do that with 60 air chiefs together. So how do they keep the conversation rich, but actually away from the highly sensitive bits and bobs?
Yeah, we're largely talking about concepts and ideas. We're not talking about the mechanics or the binary noughts and ones that are involved. Many of the people in the room will know that bit, the layer behind it. But yeah, this is more about ideas, and it's more importantly, it's bringing in industry, bringing in academia. So it's a much richer conversation than perhaps you would have in a classified briefing room with just service personnel.
It's also making sure there's a lot of alignment. I mean, I was in Ankara for the NATO conference, and what we tend to focus on is the global leaders being there, but in reality, there's lots of industry behind. And I think what Mark Rutte said was that it's one thing for nations to start committing 3.5%, 5%. It's quite another how you convert that money into military capability, and that's where you need industry in the room as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and they play a key role in that, and that will be acknowledged in the room. I am absolutely certain of it. Of course, we've got Farnborough next week, where we'll see an awful lot of money and investment going in around the aerospace, particularly around defence as well. So yeah, it's an absolute critical part of it.
And the final bit of that was that it's as much about relationships, isn't it? I mean, we know a lot of the people now, particularly in our service, but for the chiefs, they need to form a good relationship with their other service chiefs around the world, because that relationship is invaluable, isn't it? Because when the proverbial hits the fan, you do need to know some of these people in key positions. That's one of the values of an event like this.
Yeah, there'll be a really strong NATO flavour to the conference, as there normally is. So we'll see plenty of that, and coming off the back of Ankara as well. There's also many, many partners and allies around the world as well. Middle East is a particularly critical area right now for obvious reasons. So yeah, the relationships that are held at those senior levels, they do drop all the way down through the organisation, but it is so important to keep those relationships and keep talking.
So one of the backdrops for today's conference, obviously, is the war in Ukraine. It's been going for 4 years. The war in Iran's been going. Russia seems to be resurgent, much more bigger threat. And this whole nuclear debate has now been looming, particularly with President Putin starting to rattle a nuclear sabre. One of the three themes that's going to be happening at the conference is a return to the Royal Air Force having a tactical nuclear capability gain. Now, you and I are old enough that when we joined the service, that was in. You actually were part of that at the time. It felt like it was thrown out as a sort of fishing idea that we dropped in the Defence Investment Plan. But it survived, hasn't it? Where are we with that, and how do you think that's going to be discussed here at the conference?
Yeah, it was quite an eye-catching part of the SDR, the Defence Review, and I think a lot of people thought it wouldn't survive through to the dip, that when money was tight, it would be one of the things that would go by the wayside. It's still there. And Harv Smith and the team are now looking at how they restore what they're calling their nuclear IQ. How do they build back that knowledge and the culture that you need to manage the nuclear capability that I remember as a boy when I first started, but for an Air Force now that has not done that for nearly over 30 years. So yeah, there'll be a lot talked about that. It's the first time we talked about it at a conference, so there'll be lots to talk about. Lots of people to learn from in the room. There are at least 5 partners in Europe that do this, plus America, obviously.
But what about, one of the challenges I suspect is there's going to be a lot of military guys in the room, but as soon as you start talking nuclear, it's as much political as it is military, because our politicians are a key part of that whole deterrence idea. It feels like there's quite a lot of experience from the military side. Where does that experience come, and how do we influence the political side?
Yeah, one of the challenges I think we find every year is how do we translate the mechanics of air power and space power into the minds of politicians who have to learn how to employ it, or what the limitations are. A really good example is Iran. We've seen air power literally have, beat all comers, and yet we still see a strategic failure. You need to understand what your limitations are. We have never really had any politician, to my knowledge, that has ever experienced the tactical air nuclear capability, and how you would ever even think of employing that. CASD, the sort of continuous at sea deterrent, is a Hail Mary button that you kind of think about and hope that will never come. But tactical nuclear weapons is a much more nuanced, much more challenging
I guess
concept.
That's what I mean in a way, because I still can't quite get my head around, not time on this podcast, what tactical nuclear weapon means, because You're either pregnant or you're not. You can't be a little bit pregnant.
It sounds a bit of a misnomer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'll just drop a little one. I mean, but this is what we see Putin does, and Putin uses these as leverage. And I think that's what NATO now has to relearn. How do you deter Putin from playing silly buggers with his? If we've now got this capability, and I think that's why it's so important, because GASCC, if you like, is the ultimate deterrent. But are you really going to press that button?
But it's also, it relies heavily on not being able to see through the ocean. So our submarines go silent, run deep, and can't be found.
Yeah.
And that's going to be for the next 50 years.
And a single submarine that is getting older.
If they start to be able to be tracked, and that technology does seem to be making big advances.
Yeah.
One of the other themes out here was operationalising space. Now, in your and my time, we formed Space Command, but it felt like we were sort of playing at space. We've got the American chief of their Space Command here. What do you think is meant by operationalising space, and what's the point of having that in the conference?
Yeah, my instinct tells me we're going to get a few announcements over the next 2 days on space, but let's leave those for when they come. But I think operationalising for me is getting on with it. I mean, we've talked about why space is important, how space is important, and what needs to be done. But we haven't put an awful lot of money into it. I think what we're now seeing in the dip is we are seeing more money. We're also seeing NATO, particularly European half of NATO, realising that America's not going to be there every time, in all circumstances, and therefore we need to start building up our own capability. And I think that will include relationships with the commercial as well. We're already seeing tie-ups with Harwell, our space centre here in the UK. So I think we'll see a real burgeoning here of how space is managed in the UK.
Yeah, it does feel it's one of those areas where commercial are leading the military, and therefore how do we leverage off that? And I don't think any of us have got the money that America's got.
No, or even Mr. Musk.
Well, yeah, with SpaceX and everything. The other thing that this looking at is integrated air and missile defence. It's a big topic. I mean, literally in this last week, President Trump's been saying that President Zelensky is going to be allowed to build his own Patriots. Interesting to see how that works. There's also been a lot of announcements in Europe. I do wonder sometimes whether we overplay this, because I think a lot of the public see integrated air and missile defence a bit like Israel's Iron Dome, that there'll be some magical switch and suddenly there'll be a Klingon cloaking device and a protection over the whole of the UK. I don't think that's ever going to be affordable. So why do we need an integrated air and missile defence, and are we actually going to be able to protect Joe Public, or are we just going to have to get used to the fact that some of this stuff's going to get through?
Well, we need it for a number of reasons. One is the threat is there, and you need to protect yourself from that threat to a certain extent. The other one is it's the one thing that brings the war home, isn't it? And I think, here we are in London. In the 1940s, we perhaps wouldn't be having this conversation. It would be explicit in everything we see. But we have a nation here that's not been used to being attacked for 80 plus years. And you only have to look at Ukraine to see what the effect might be. So yeah, we do, and there's drones, cruise missiles. The threats are growing, aren't they, every day?
Well, that's why I wonder about events like this. There'll be some envy at what the Americans can throw at this. They've obviously got their Aegis, their THAAD missiles, Patriot. But they're so expensive, and we could spend the whole of the defence budget and only ever be able to protect one borough of London.
Well, I think Richard Barron's, I think he put a figure on it. It's somewhere between 80 and 150 billion to build a semi-decent air defence system. We haven't got that money.
Well, also, if you actually look at the matchup, how many missiles would we have? And I think Iran's been a really good example. They're always going to have 10 times as many missiles as you've got ability to defend against them. So I'm not entirely sure that's the answer either. I do wonder, so events like this also, there is a danger that is dominated by Ukraine. It's dominated by the lessons identified from that, drones and the advent of drone warfare, and likewise Iran. Even as we are here, President Trump's now sort of gone off a completely different tack, claiming he's going to control the Strait of Hormuz. How much do you think current events and wars like that influence the direction of travel of these sorts of conferences?
I mean, hugely. I do worry sometimes that people pick up on fads. A politician might alight on a certain capability and start pressing it. Or the general public. So if you take the two wars you've mentioned, and we're going to be looking at those at conference, you've got Iran, where the overwhelming superiority of American air and space power has not won the war. I mean, even today we're still talking about tariffs and control of the Straits of Hormuz. So there are limitations to air and space power, no matter how good you are. And then we look at Ukraine, where everyone says drones are the answer, and yet we're in our fourth year of the war, fifth year nearly, longer than the First World War, tens of thousands of casualties every month. Is that how you want to fight? Is that the war you want? So yeah, you could pick those two extremes and say, those are the two ways I want to fight. Well, neither have prevailed. So there's something else we need to think about here.
Yeah, and also I think particularly around the drone conversation is that I know flippantly we used to describe them as a cheap way to deliver a hand grenade. But if you do look at the advent of some of these, Zelensky's used them very famously to strike deep. Only in the press yesterday, we're talking about sea drones taking out submarines, taking some of the BL-755. Remember the old CBUs we used to?
Well.
Taking 147 bombers. Take one of those, put it on a drone, and you can go straight through the side of a tank.
Yeah.
How do we actually develop? And I think it's some really interesting technology they're going to be talking about at the conference as well.
We've definitely increased the mass of the threat here, and if you can reduce the cost, you can afford to build more. Now, are those cheaper systems as sophisticated and as able to get through, and will we find less sophisticated ways of shooting them down? I think the answer to that is yes, but it's a bit of an arms race to the bottom here, isn't it, rather than an arms race to the top. So, and there are plenty of exhibitors here and sponsors who are definitely in that space.
It's interesting you describe the race to the bottom or top, though. I was chuckling yesterday because it's the Lucas 136. The Americans have said that they've declared for the first time they've been using these drones against Iran. They look remarkably like the Shahed 136 and that which the Iranians developed, sold to Russia, used in Ukraine. And now the Americans are copying that drone. It's a lot lighter, smaller payload, because actually it costs $30,000, a lot cheaper than the missiles cost. So all of a sudden, is it a rush to the bottom, or is it just a recognition that exquisite costs you a lot of money, that mass quantity sometimes has a quality all of its own?
Well, it's definitely a different way of doing things. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were looking at companies that might be able to help build that type of a drone. And they were looking at the likely technology areas. And interestingly, the one area it was worth looking at is paddle boards, because these drones are made out of the same high density foam that paddle boards are made out of. So we're going to some rather unusual manufacturers now to ask for their help in making military weapons. So yeah, the world is moving fast.
One of the things that we've clearly got a fair American presence here, and clearly that's part of the air and space power bond. How much is that affected, do you think, by the current actions of the US president? Because it's creating a lot of frictions between America and Europe politically. How much does that manifest itself, do you think, into the military domain?
None of us can ignore, can we, what goes on in the White House and around it. But I think what this will show is actually when you cut away that noise and maybe a little bit of froth too, that actually when you get deep down to it, the relationships are very, very strong. The way we think, the way we operate, the way we interconnect each other is still incredibly strong. Now, America will choose to do what America chooses to do. But what is also happening, of course, is Europe is responding to that. We're in the midst here of Europe's greatest rearmament program for decades. UK is a little bit slow come to the table, but we are in a completely different changed world. I therefore think that we should be less dependent on America, but I think what we'll hear today and tomorrow is that we will not see, an America backing away intellectually. I think that relationship will endure.
There's a bit of an irony, isn't there, about some of this stuff, because the Europeans are now trying to develop their own capability, be less dependent on America. The American arms industry, therefore, will suffer in some respect because of that.
Yeah, they may not say that out loud, but yeah, they'll be sweating.
And the other bit, the final bit from me is that there's been a lot of talk about uncrewed over the last little while, and the use of AI. And certainly our defence investment plan was laden heavily with that. There's a lot of conversation about whether actually technology is ready. I remember speaking to some of the seniors that are going to be here over the next couple of days who said, yeah, they were sceptical until they went and saw what America was doing, and they went, we need to catch up fast. Do you get that sense as well?
Yeah, I think we're beginning to see what used to be a nice, pretty picture turning into reality. We're certainly seeing that in America, where we're beginning to see production runs and America ordering, numbers of these things that are beyond research and development. I think the UK does want to catch up on that, and I think we will see, and it'll be interesting to see how much announcement we get over the next few days. It'll also be very interesting to see what's on display at Farnborough. But I think, we need to move away from the drawing board now and start putting these into action. Ukraine has demonstrated that this is definitely a way to move. I think the big question isn't about the sort of lower tech drones. I think they're kind of cemented in now. It's this higher tech, these CCAs, collaborative combat aircraft, that are as yet unproven operationally, but we're getting there.
So how many years have Air and Space Power Association been doing this conference?
This is
now?
our 10th conference.
And for the first time I've seen in my time, we have actually got a growing Royal Air Force. We've got a growing amount of budget. There's money going into defence rather than coming out. And it does feel like air and space are first responders at the moment. So it feels like this conference could be a really interesting place for the next couple of days.
Yeah, it's a good time to have the conference. And I think everyone was nervous about the dip and its outcomes. But you're right. I mean, air has been absolutely in the vanguard for the last few months, whether it be in Iran or elsewhere, and certainly around NATO. So we should celebrate that. People have been working hard, doing very good things and doing them well. But also we are seeing investment beginning to emerge, not just across Europe, but in the UK, and more of that to come. So yeah, an exciting time really to be part of the world.
I think it'll be a really good conference. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.